shock you and other liberals. But there are some black people in America who can think for themselves. Without somebody telling them how to think. And then I said, secondly, sir, this may be even more difficult for you to comprehend. When we reach a point in this great country where we cannot constructively criticize our leaders, we are no longer a democratic republic. We will have become a nation ruled by tyranny, and some of us are not going to let that happen, not on our watch. No, not going to happen. Then I said, have a nice life. But let me tell you what inspires me. Several things. First, my faith in God. My faith in God inspires me because of what I've been through in my life. I've been through some challenging things. I've even faced some life-threatening experiences. My faith in God. The example of my mom and my dad. My mom and my dad, they both were raised on small farms. They walked off at the age of 18. They walked off different farms and then ended up meeting and got married and ended up living in Atlanta, Georgia, where they raised my brother and I. I never heard my dad ask about, well, what's the latest government program that's going to help us? Dad worked three jobs, because Dad knew that the only kind of equity that he had in this country in order to be able to achieve his American dream was sweat equity. So he was a barber, a janitor, and a chauffeur all at the same time. Until he worked three jobs until he could live off of two jobs. He worked two jobs until he could make it off of one job. So he could achieve his American dreams. One of his American dreams was to be able to own a whole house for the family. You know, we lived in what my brother and I used to call a half a house growing up. It was a 6-room house, 3 rooms on one side, 3 rooms on the other side. Some people call it a shotgun house. But my brother and I used to call it a half a house. We used to say to my dad, Dad, why do we live in a half a house? You know, we had friends who lived across the street. They had the whole house. We only had half of it. We thought, well, something's wrong here. So Dad would tell us, it's a duplex. But Dad, we live in a half a house. So I'll never forget the day that Dad came home and told my mother, my brother, and I, get in the car. We got in the car. We didn't know where we were going. It was a Saturday. Man working 3 jobs isn't going to be home much on Saturday. We got in the car. Dad drove west on Bankhead Highway. About 35 or 40 minutes later, he made a couple of turns. Ended up on a little street called Albert Street. Pulled up in front of the 3rd house on the right. Little brick house with grass growing around it. Not attached to any other house. I was in the 8th grade. My dad was in the, my brother was in the 6th grade. I was in 8th grade. Dad pulled up and announced very proudly, this is our new home. We said, what? We jumped out of the car, ran up to the house. Dad walked up very proudly. You see, we didn't know that Dad had been banking one of those checks from one of those jobs, saving for that house to achieve his dream. We went inside. Dad announced it has 2 bedrooms, one for you boys and one for your mom and me. And I'm going to buy y'all twin beds. Twin beds? We thought we died and going to heaven. You see, when we were living in the duplex, my brother and I slept on a cot in the kitchen. Every morning we'd argue over whose turn is it to take it up, and every evening we'd argue over whose turn is it to take it down. Twin beds. My mother was in tears of joy. Remember, Mom had walked off of a small farm also. Mom was in tears. She didn't know Dad had saved enough money to go out and buy a brand new brick house, not attached to another house. didn't know Dad is going out and bought the house. Don't try that today, man. Don't try that. You might be living in that sucker by yourself. Maybe you and Rover. But that was one of Dad's dreams. Just like it was your parents' dream for you all to get a better shot at life in this great country. Just like we want to give our children and grandchildren the type of country that we have been able to live in. So my parents' life inspired me. 1999, my first grandchild was born. First time I looked in that little face, the first thought that occurred to me was, what do I do to make this a better world? Not, what do I do to give her a good future? No, what do I do to make this a better world? And a reporter asked me, well, why is it that grandkids were so inspiring to you to consider running for president of the United States versus your kids? I said, when my kids were born, they're now 38, 32. When my children were born, we thought about their future. When grandkids are born, you think about the future of the nation. Ask any grandparent. Your focus becomes a little bit different. It becomes a little bit different. So that's what inspires me. And one of the other things that I get inspired by is the fact that we can solve our problems. And it's not rocket science. We have an economy that's still stalled, and they keep tinkering around the edges. We have runaway spending. They've been talking about going through all of the budget battles over the last couple of weeks, and they keep tinkering around the edges. Well, we're going to need some bold leadership to fix this economy, because that's the first thing that we need to do. And yes, I've got some ideas, and I got them from you. I got them from listeners. These are not original ideas, but what happens is a lot of good ideas get stuck in Washington, D.C., or they get stuck in a committee, and they don't go anywhere. You know, for example, the fair tax, which we need to pass to replace the current tax code, has been stuck in Washington, D.C. for 12 years. That's one of the solutions out there that we ought to be pushing. We can solve our problems. I call them common sense solutions to America's problems. Yeah. But it's going to take the right kind of leadership. It's going to take the involvement of we the people, you the people. That's the only way we're going to be able to do it. So stay informed, stay involved, and stay inspired. Because no matter what you might hear some people say, we are still the greatest country in the world, but we have to keep it that way. That's what this fight is all about, is to be able to keep this country as one of the greatest countries in the world. And I'm reminded the words of the giver, whose 100th birthday it would have been a week ago Sunday, when the giver used to remind us that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We can't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for. It must be protected. Or one day, we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it used to be like in the United States when men were free. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to have that conversation with my grandkids, and I don't think you want to have that conversation with your grandkids. And that's why this movement that's sweeping across this country is sending a loud message to Washington, D.C. and the White House. The United States of America is not going to become the United States of Europe